Padre Pio often described his visions with deep emotion, but this one left him silent for a long time before he could speak of it. He said that during prayer, the veil between the earthly world and the spiritual realm thinned, and he found himself seeing something he did not expect, a single soul suspended between suffering and salvation. This soul was surrounded by an unusual light, not bright like the rays of heaven, nor dark like the shadows of judgment. Instead, it was a trembling, golden glow, flickering like a candle fighting against the wind. The soul itself appeared to be in great agony. Padre Pio could sense the weight of its pain, not physical pain, but something far deeper, the pain of regret, purification, and the consequences of a life with many wounds. Yet, at the same time, he felt an overwhelming tenderness coming from the light that held it. It was as if the soul was being cleansed through that suffering, not crushed by it. Padre Pio later explained that the light represented God's mercy, embracing the soul even while it endured purification. The suffering was real, but it was not the suffering of despair, it was the suffering that restores, reshapes, and prepares a soul for eternal peace. What shocked Padre Pio most was the expression on the soul's face. Though tormented, it showed no hatred, no rebellion, no refusal. Instead, there was a sense of surrender and acceptance that allowed the mysterious light to draw closer and closer, slowly transforming the soul from within. For Padre Pio, this vision revealed something profound, that some souls are saved not in spite of their suffering, but through it. Their agony becomes a pathway, and the light, gentle, patient, and divine, becomes their guide toward redemption. Padre Pio understood immediately that the suffering he witnessed was not random, cruel, or meaningless. Every pain in the soul carried a story, one shaped by choices, failures, weaknesses, and a lifetime of quiet battles. As the vision deepened, Padre Pio was shown glimpses of the soul's earthly life. It was a life marked not by great evil, but by a long pattern of lukewarmness, negligence, and spiritual forgetfulness. This soul had drifted through life without deliberately rejecting God, but also without truly seeking Him. It was a person who prayed only when convenient, forgave only when easy, and loved only when it came with no cost. Their sins were not dramatic, but they were persistent. Over years, these small but repeated failures formed heavy chains that the soul carried, unnoticed chains made of selfish habits, ignored responsibilities, and a quiet pride of believing there would always be more time. Yet the greatest wound of this soul was not what it did, but what it failed to do. It had many opportunities to love, to help, to sacrifice, but it had chosen comfort instead. These neglected moments became shadows that clung to the soul in the afterlife, demanding purification. Padre Pio realized that the intense suffering the soul now endured was the divine remedy for those wounds. The pain was not punishment for rejection, but healing for a lifetime of spiritual blindness. Each wave of suffering peeled away pride. Each tear shed washed away ego. Each moment of agony loosened the chains that selfishness had forged. The soul suffered because it needed to, because the impurities it carried could not enter heaven. And yet, even in this pain, God's mercy was at work, transforming the soul through the very suffering it had once feared. As Padre Pio continued watching the soul endure its purification, something remarkable began to unfold, something so delicate and mysterious that he later said no human language could fully describe it. The soul, once tense and bound by invisible weight, started to change. At first, the transformation was subtle, like the faint glow of dawn barely breaking through the night. But slowly, steadily, it became undeniable. Each surge of suffering seemed to melt a layer of darkness clinging to the soul. What had looked like heavy stains of guilt and regret began to dissolve in the fire of purification. The soul's form, initially dim and almost distorted by the burden of pride and selfishness, started to grow clearer, lighter, and more radiant. It was as if the soul was remembering what it was always meant to be, something pure, humble, and capable of holiness. Padre Pio saw that the suffering was not destroying the soul. It was reshaping it. The cries that once sounded like despair gradually softened into an expression of surrender. The soul no longer resisted purification. Instead, it seemed to welcome it, understanding, perhaps for the first time, the depth of God's mercy. Then Padre Pio witnessed a moment that struck him deeply. The soul lifted its gaze upward, toward a light that seemed to come from beyond the vision itself. The more the soul accepted its suffering, the brighter this light became. It was not harsh or blinding, but tender, like the light of someone who had always loved the soul patiently, waiting for it to recognize that love. By the time this stage of purification ended, the soul looked almost unrecognizable compared to how it had begun. Its radiance was still faint, but unmistakable, a sign that the worst was behind it and that something far more beautiful awaited. In the final stage of the vision, Padre Pio saw the soul reach a decisive moment, one that would determine whether it stepped into God's presence or fell back into darkness. This was not suffering anymore. It was something deeper, something more intimate. It was the soul's complete surrender. The soul, now softened by purification, stood before a brilliance unlike anything Padre Pio had ever witnessed. It wasn't merely light. It was love itself, alive, personal, and overwhelmingly gentle. The closer the soul drew to this light, the more clearly it understood everything it had failed to see while alive. The weight of its sins, the opportunities wasted, the selfishness it once excused. But instead of despair, the soul felt an indescribable longing, a desire to run toward the one who had waited for it since its creation. Padre Pio sensed the soul's fear as well, a hesitation, almost like a trembling child unsure if it deserved forgiveness. But in that moment, something extraordinary happened. A presence, possibly its guardian angel, stood beside the soul, offering strength, reminding it silently that God's mercy is greater than human weakness. With a final deep breath of surrender, the soul stepped forward. All resistance vanished. All fear dissolved, and instantly the light enveloped it completely. Not with force, but with a warmth so tender that Padre Pio said it could only be described as a divine embrace. The soul's transformation was complete. The radiance that now shone from it matched the purity of the light it entered. Every wound had been healed, every tear wiped away, every shadow burned out by love. Padre Pio understood in that moment that suffering had not saved the soul, its surrender to God's mercy had. And that surrender opened the gates of eternal joy. After witnessing the soul's journey, Padre Pio reflected deeply on what he had seen. For him, this vision was not only a revelation but also a warning, a message for every living soul. He understood that suffering, though painful, is often misunderstood. Many people see it as punishment, an injustice, or a meaningless burden. But Padre Pio saw something else. Suffering can become the very bridge that carries a soul back to God. He explained that suffering strips away illusions. It weakens pride, softens the heart, and forces a person to confront truths they avoid in comfortable moments. When accepted with humility, even imperfectly, suffering becomes an offering, a purification, a quiet path toward grace. It does not automatically save a soul, but it opens the soul to mercy. Padre Pio insisted that the soul he witnessed was not saved because it suffered, but because suffering finally broke the walls that had kept God out. It was the soul's surrender, born through hardship, that allowed divine mercy to flood in. This vision, according to him, is a reminder for the living. Do not waste your suffering. Offer it. Unite it with prayer. Allow it to reshape your heart rather than harden it. God never abandons a soul that cries out to him through pain. Padre Pio's final message was simple yet powerful. A suffering offered to God can save a life, a soul, and even a destiny. It is not the paean that transforms us, but what we do with it.